you the news. Printed the info, we gave you the clues. Owners' profits were always sky high. Changing market now threatens our lives. Post-literation.
Hey everybody, I'm Eugene Driscoll. Welcome to Valley Sports Rewind. I thought I would do the intro for this particular episode of Valley Sports Rewind. But before we get to anything, Mike, that's my dog under the table. We're recording this in my kitchen in Derby, and my dog Sophie's trying to take a nap, and she just groaned. Even she hates my podcast. All right, so the Derby Athletic Hall of Fame, the Derby High School Athletic Hall of Fame, is happening Sunday, April 28th, 12:30 p.m. at Vazzy's Four Seasons, 337 Kenyon Street in Stratford. The doors open at noon. It's $50 a person, cash or check. Checks can be made out to the Derby Athletic Hall of Fame. Payments can be mailed to Derby High School, 75 Chatfield Street, 06418 in Derby. Make it attention Jen Moffitt. To reserve a table, please email Tom Abel at tom.c.abel, A-B-E-L, at lmco.com. Also, if you want to sponsor an ad in the book they're putting together, $25, quarter page, half page, $50, full page, $100. Any questions, call Mike Cannici at 203-305-9442. So you sent me that like a week ago, and I forgot to put it online because I'm drowning. I'm sorry, Mike. So there it is. There's our ad
That's okay. Don't worry about it. The good thing is I also sent it out to a couple of newspapers. And
all right, let's go. Moving on. So for this episode of Valley Sports Rewind, Mike had messaged me. I had shared something on Facebook on my personal page about this Vice, the entertainment thing, the hipster millennial loved entertainment media organization, doing this documentary. I think it's called The Dark Side of the Ring, about wrestling. Yeah, Dark Side of the Ring. It comes out in like a week or so. As we're recording this on April 2nd, 2019. And then you had messaged me and said, hey, we just missed the 32nd anniversary of
WrestleMania 3, which came out March 29th, 1987.
And then the big thing was, what was the main event was?
It was Hulk Hogan, who was the champion, and he took on Andre the Giant, and that was the first time in Andre the Giant's career he played the bad guy. So.
And I thought, like, that brought back a lot of memories to me. And you're like, oh, too bad we didn't do a podcast. But I'm like, oh, heck, let's try it. Right. So here we are in my echo-filled kitchen, recording on a cell phone and a handheld device.
Whatever it takes, right?
There's been, I think, this whole like resurgence in that 80s era, which I've learned from Google is called the golden era of the WWF, now WWE. We just had the Andre the Giant documentary come out a month or two ago on HBO.
Right.
We've got this Vice thing coming out. There's a lot of interest in those golden years. So you grew up here in Derby.
Right.
Like, what type of wrestling fan were you? How committed?
I was very committed. I got into it around 1986. There was the big match for WrestleMania 2. It was going to be Hulk Hogan versus King Kong Bundy.
Who just passed away. Yeah, rest in peace, King Kong Bundy.
God rest his soul. And he had, like, attacked Hulk Hogan. And back then, when you saw, like, a big guy attack somebody like that, you just looked at them as a bully and stuff. So that really got me interested because I wanted to see Hulk Hogan beat him.
And about how old were you then?
Let's see, that was 86. I was 9 years old. I was like 2 months away from being 10.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So that's when I first really started to kind of like follow it. Now, I didn't see WrestleMania 2 because I still wasn't totally committed. But by the summer that year, I was fully committed.
And so who were your guys? Who?
I mean, Hulk Hogan was my favorite guy. I really liked Bret the Hitman Hart. If I had to pick just a wrestler, he was probably my all-time favorite. I like Tito Santana. I know you probably remember him.
Oh, yeah. I got a story about Tito.
Yeah, I like the Ultimate Warrior. I know a lot of people try to rag on him and say he was no talent. That's ridiculous. You know, and I like some of the tag teams. I like the British Bulldogs. They were very good. the Killer Bees, the Rougeau brothers. I mean, Demolition. There's so many guys. I mean, I'm trying to think at the top of my head, but there were so many I was into.
And then in Derby, did you have other friends, other young people growing up in Derby or Ansonia, that other far-off magical place next door, that also watched wrestling?
Oh, yeah.
Or was it, okay.
Let's put it this way. We'll get into it, but WrestleMania 3... I had like 2 friends over because everybody wanted to see that event. They advertised it so much. And we all used to talk about it. My father had always told me it was fake, but when you're watching it, you still feel like it's real. And I'm telling you, like, that was the conversations at the bus stop all the time.
Yeah, I remember, like, I'm slightly older than you because in 86 I was like 12. And I remember distinctly, like, I was addicted. Me and my older brother Jimmy were addicted to the old school WWF.
Oh, yeah.
It used to play, I believe, I tried to find it, so I could be wrong here. I think it was on WOR, Channel 9 in New York, out of Secaucus, New Jersey, was where they were based. Just at midnight, either on Friday or Saturdays, there would be Vince McMahon in the yellow, like, mustard jacket. Doing right. It clearly, looking back, it must have been some studio somewhere because it was all black behind him. He would do the interviews right there in front of the ring. And just like, we subscribed to multiple wrestling magazines in those days. Pro Wrestling Illustrated.
Yeah, I was a big fan of that.
I love it. Apparently, it's still around.
Yep.
Bill Apter, man.
Yep.
He was,
the guy Eddie Elner who hated all the good guys.
Right.
Yep.
The wrestler, I think.
They were all owned by
the same company.
Yes.
I never knew that.
Stanley Weston, I think, founded it. Yeah. So, I mean, and Bill Apter, I mean, like, to me, he's like, whatever you want to call him, the king of wrestling magazines. I mean, he was.
Me and my brother, we would take like, loose leaf notebook stuff, and we would draw. We would make our own wrestling magazines, with our own storylines and stuff. Like, we were way into it. Inside Wrestling was another one.
Yeah.
But it was like I kind of stopped watching. Maybe I should go to therapy. But once they brought in Cyndi Lauper, because it was real to me.
Yeah.
Like, my father never told me, no, this is not. To me, it was real. And I remember, like, growing up, none of my friends really watched it. But, so I kind of felt like, a little less than for watching it because people tended to look down on wrestling at that point. But it was real. It was, to me, I remember, like, learning that it was not exactly real.
Right.
It was, like, crushing.
I think at the time when you watched it, because you had said you stopped when they kind of brought Cyndi Lauper in, it did look more believable back then because Vince McMahon's father had owned the business at the time. And those guys...
based here in Connecticut, in Stamford.
Yeah. And those guys back in the day, were big on never exposing the business. You don't ever want to say it's fake. But Vince McMahon, Vince Jr., he had a different idea about wrestling. He wanted to make it more entertainment. And when he kind of took over... he offended a lot of people from the old territories. I mean, there were a lot of guys who did not like him. I mean, Vern Gagne, I'm sure you're familiar with him.
Sure, yeah.
If Vern Gagne had his way, he would have found McMahon somewhere and, made him disappear. I really believe that.
And there was that, I loved, like, sort of that pre-rock and roll connection era. Yeah. Where, like, Lou Albano started appearing in Cyndi Lauper videos. My dog keeps moaning. She never usually does this.
He's into the conversation.
So, there was something quaint about... It looked like it was filmed, there was something dangerous about those old, cheap shows. They weren't really... There wasn't a lot of production value to them.
No.
And I remember distinctly on a UHF TV, you'd put on the UHF thing with the rabbit ears... And for whatever reason, in Somers, New York, where I grew up, we could pick up Florida wrestling. And there was, like, Gordon, I think his name was Gordon.
Soley. Yep.
Yes!
Yeah, Gordon Soley was the legendary announcer. I mean, he started play-by-play. I mean, people loved listening to him. And, you had Ole Anderson, who kind of ran the Georgia territory, which was very big. And Ole Anderson, to this day, if you ever heard him, he does not give Vince McMahon anybody credit.
It's funny how they're all he kind of ruined it for them. Yeah, because he took over the whole planet, essentially.
Yeah, but Ole Anderson, that Georgia program was very popular. It was, a lot of people in Connecticut had WTBS at the time.
Oh, right. That's where that got all pushed, all that stuff.
Their wrestling was. They had Georgia. They had the NWA.
Yeah. Ric Flair that's where he's from. Yeah.
Yeah. And,
Nick Bockwinkel in the AWA. Wait, did I just get that wrong? Who was the AWA? Was that Nick Bockwinkel?
Nick Bockwinkel,
and Ric Flair was NWA, and Bob Backlund before Hogan.
And then
was...
another federation, which I'm sure you probably saw. It was on ESPN a lot. Was run by Fritz Von Erich. He had the Von Erich,
the Texas
Sons,
ones, yeah,
World Class Championship Wrestling.
Yes,
and I really enjoyed watching that. I mean, that looked believable too.
Kerry Von Erich, David Von Erich,
Mike, and then you had the Freebirds.
And who all, the Von Erichs are just like the saddest story.
Let me tell you.
They all died, essentially. Mike Von, even the young guy.
Chris, yeah.
Chris,
and a lot of them were self-inflicted, too, which is the most disturbing thing is that poor guy, those poor parents, they actually had a sixth son. I don't know if you knew that. They had a son named Jackie, and he accidentally electrocuted himself when he was 6 years old and died. He was their oldest son. And out of the six sons, Jackie's was obviously accidental, but out of those six sons, only one is alive, and the other five that died, 4 of them were by suicide. So,
it's just horrible.
Yeah.
And that's part of that Vice documentary. I'm trying to bring up a write-up of it here on my laptop, but I'm having technical problems everywhere today.
Yeah.
I can't even get it to come up. I wanted to see when it's coming on. But Viceland Dark Side of the Ring docuseries, one of the things they're gonna talk about, one of the episodes, I guess, is going to be dedicated solely to that Von Erich story.
Yeah.
And the other thing they're going to talk about is it premieres April 10th, 9 p.m. I'm not exactly sure where, but
and that's next Wednesday, I believe.
Oh yeah, so that's coming right. They're gonna. It's directed by the guy who made Hobo with a Shotgun. I don't know if you ever saw that movie. It's a great. It's a B movie, but it's a deliberate B movie. Bruiser Brody. I don't know if you remember him.
He was Bruiser Brody and another guy who died tragically.
Then they're gonna concentrate on that. I totally forgotten about that. He got stabbed to death.
He got stabbed, and everybody knows who did it. And
the guy got off.
He got off, and he continued to work. OJ got found not guilty. We know he was guilty, but he got found not guilty. Nobody wanted to touch him. This guy, basically, everybody knows he did it, and he's still working.
He's moved on.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize Bruiser Brody had a whole reputation of just being pretty difficult to work with. He was a real unique personality.
Well, he was also what they call a booker, too. He booked a lot of events, and he was the type of guy that, he was going to do it his way, no matter what you asked him to do. If you remember Bobby Heenan, which I'm sure you do.
Sure, the brain.
He did not like working for Bruiser Brody. He worked with him briefly, and he said Bruiser Brody never wanted to pay anybody good.
And speaking of that, the other thing that Vice thing is going to concentrate on is Fabulous Moolah.
Yes.
Who has a whole other... I mean, she was, of course, the by far most famous female wrestler forever.
Yes.
Until Wendy Richter came along during that whole rock and roll connection type that thing. But Moolah, the allegations against her is that she was basically a tyrant.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of crazy... I don't even want to go into some of it.
I think,
how she was either evil or I don't know what.
And that could be true. But, think about the guy who's running the world right now as far as wrestling goes, Vince McMahon. And he gets all the credit for the marketing. He's a great promoter, everything. But he is not exactly a saint either. I mean, if you listen to a lot of interviews, him and his wife, it sounds like they both treated a lot of these wrestlers very bad. Didn't pay them good, and they never want to be accountable for anything.
There was no you growing up, you think these guys are part of a team, but they were really all treated like independent contractors.
Yeah,
pretty much. In a way, disposable. It's at least if you read how they're
because,
all. It wasn't like they were cared for.
You don't have to give them a pension. You don't have to give them insurance. But at the same time, you want them everywhere. If they get hurt, you want them everywhere. I mean, one day you got to listen to an old interview with Bam Bam Bigelow. He basically had 2 knees that needed surgery, but they told him if he didn't come to the show, he was going to be fired.
You got to. Although I guess that's changed now that it's modernized and now it's all
now.
But there was a circus type atmosphere back that. Bam Bam Bigelow, I forgot about him. I'm thinking about Ox Baker too. His famous scene of Escape from New York.
He was, but a lot of these guys were just tremendous performers because a lot of them you were scared of. I'll tell you right now. I mean, I was scared of a lot of these guys when I was a kid.
Did you see wrestling live? Like, I know you used to go to the Coliseum. Is that right? New Haven?
New Haven. And I saw a tape-in one time. You know, the big thing was Hulk Hogan was going to wrestle Hercules in the main event. And
what was it, the main event, the TV show? Or what was
the
main
event?
It. Of your thing. Okay, go ahead.
So anyway, that was why everybody was trying to get tickets, because it was very rare to see Hulk Hogan live. So we got the tickets, but what we didn't realize was that was going to be the match off camera. You know, like how they do a match off camera?
Yep.
That would be the match. The rest of it was 4 tape-ins of their, like, superstars of wrestling. And I'll never forget, Hercules came out and he was wrestling a guy by the name of Mario Mancini, who's still in Connecticut to this day. Mario was like one of their jobbers.
Wait, did Mario Mancini, I believe...
He's a lawyer now. His name's Leonard something. I forget what his real name is.
I'm trying to remember. We had an intern at the Valley Indy named Vanessa, and her father was a WWF wrestler. I wonder if that's
Yeah, he does have a couple daughters.
Okay.
But that match, I'll never forget it. We all thought Hulk wasn't showing up because we were young, and and everybody in the crowd is chanting Hogan's name during that match. And it was just part of the taping. And, you know, Hogan did finally show up at the end. He fought Hercules. But I'll just never forget going to that taping that night. You know, that night I saw Adrian Adonis. He cut Brutus Beefcake's hair by accident.
Now, this is the Adrian Adonis when he had the blonde hair, flamboyant hair? Okay.
The flamboyant
because he started off, he was a New York City tough guy. He would, like, you know...
Yeah, well, they changed his character.
They changed his character. Yeah, that's
put
a
him
weird
with Jimmy
thing.
Hart, and he kind of really touched on that whole new way that wrestling was going. You know, I'm sure you remember a guy by the name of Goldust. He was a little freaky.
Yeah, that was kind of... I had stopped watching...
Son.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay,
yeah, Dusty Rhodes' son, Dustin.
I got a Dusty Rhodes doll upstairs.
But Adrian Adonis kind of took... Back then, it was unheard of to do stuff like that. And they took a lot of heat for his character.
Yeah.
But, you know, of course, Adrian Adonis, another sad story. Him and his friend... Well, him and a few wrestlers, they were taking a drive to go to the next town they were going to work in. And they tried to avoid a moose, and they couldn't. And 3 of them died, including him, and only 1 survived in one of the worst car accidents ever.
That's insane. I mean, some of those guys have such bizarre demises. I mean, you know.
I know. I mean, you can't... And so many of them... If you watch WrestleMania 3, we're going to get into that a little. So many of the guys on that card are now deceased. And none of them... Like, Andre the Giant, if he were alive right now, he'd be 73 years old. He's been dead for 25 years.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, because now we're like the age where these guys started dying off.
Yeah.
They seem so old when you're younger. But I remember I saw a couple of live wrestling matches. I grew up in New York, in Westchester County. The county center was in White Plains, New York. It was a small venue, and they would have live wrestling. And my father, a couple of times, he would get there early to get autographs. You'd see the guys coming in.
Yeah.
And I was real young. And I remember Tito Santana, he was driving like a Peugeot. It was like this sports car. I don't know if that's how you say it. But he comes out and he's got like he looked like he was going to the office, except he had like his shirt open and some chest hair. And he was carrying, I believe he was the Intercontinental Champion at the time.
Yeah, he did hold it for 2 times.
He was carrying the belt in, and he goes past me, and I was like, "Oh, can I have your autograph?" And I remember he looks at me, he goes, I got to go in. I got to train. Like, and he wouldn't give me an autograph.
He didn't give you an
He wouldn't give me an autograph.
Oh, wow.
And I was crushed. You know what I mean? Like, you're like, what? But even more bizarre, and I've told the story a lot. Who knows if I'm getting it right anymore at this age? But Iron Mike Sharp, the bad guy.
He was a funny guy.
He comes walking by, and he's got that thing. He's carrying the thing he would put on his forearm with the foreign objects or whatever it was. And I was terrified. I'm like, oh my God. And he just walks up to me. He like pats me on the head. Hey, how's it going? But he gives me the autograph, like without even me asking. And it was just so mind blowing that Tito, my hero, gave me the high hat. But now years later, I go to Monster Mania in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. I try to go it's a huge horror movie thing, but those things, they always have wrestlers there, and it's always Tito Santana was there.
Yeah,
and it's kind of sad to see some of them. Greg the Hammer Valentine.
Yeah,
they kind of get put out with the general public. You know, they'll have like the guy who played Freddy Krueger, Robert Englund. He's a private room. You have to wait on the line for 4 hours to get his autograph, which I never do. But you can go right up to Greg Valentine, like, hey, what's up, Hammer? And he's just right there.
Yeah.
And the Iron Sheik too, which is like the Iron Sheik. He'd go out. He had him outside in a tent. a giant tent, and he would have to take breaks every like 15 minutes, right? And I'm like, he's pounding beers. He's just going outside and just pounding cans of beer. We got him to say stuff about Artie Lang. But anyway, that was my one story. And King Kong Mosca. I remember King Kong Mosca. We had front row seats at the county center. And King Kong Mosca, I don't remember who he was fighting, but he came flying out of the ring right in front of me and my brother. And my brother Jimmy reached down and touched him, like tapped him on the shoulder. And I was like, oh my God, he's going to kill us. Yeah. And he came back, looked at us. But there's a great video of King Kong Mosca, like at age 70, getting into a fist fight with a former Canadian. They played Canadian football. Yeah. These two guys go to some kind of alumni reunion, and there's some lingering grudge from the 60s between the two of them, and they get into these two old guys get into a fist fight. It's just
really,
yeah. You got to Google it.
Interesting. But anyway, you brought up Iron Mike Sharp. He passed away not too long ago, and what's really unique about him is he kind of played a jobber.
I didn't know he died.
Yeah, a few years ago, he played a jobber in the ring. But they said in real life in the locker room, nobody messed with him. He was a legit tough guy. He really was. And then Tito Santana, what's unique about him is his whole career, he played a good guy. Usually these guys, they turn him bad, good.
Yeah, bad. Do whatever.
He never turned bad. He always played the good guy his whole career. And he was the type of guy, too. You kind of felt sorry for him because he would win against the jobbers, but anytime he seemed to wrestle like a guy they were trying to like build up, he had to be the guy to make him look good and get beat.
And that seemed like to be that whole intercontinental thing. Because I think back, like before him, I remember when I religiously watched, it was Pedro Morales, who also just recently passed away, but lived to a ripe old age. And they were awesome, but they never really got they never got their shot at the
peak. We kind of missed, maybe not you as much, but I never really got to see Pedro or Tito when they were really having their big run. Because by the time I started watching, Tito had lost the belt to the Macho Man. And then after that, Tito had like a little run as tag team champion. But after that, he was just there to put guys over and to make them look good.
That was pretty much
it. And Pedro Morales was towards the end of his career. He was big in the 70s. Yeah. Had some great matches with Bruno.
Yeah, I remember distinctly when Bob Backlund was champion. That's really when I was I remember being crushed when the Iron Sheik beat him at the first. Was that at WrestleMania?
No, not WrestleMania. It was at Madison Square Garden. His manager threw in the towel.
And that was the end of Bob Backlund. And so the first WrestleMania, was that when Hogan won?
No,
I'm confused.
Hogan won at a regular house show at Madison Square Garden.
Okay.
He beat the Iron Sheik. WrestleMania 1 didn't come till 1985. It was March 31st.
What was the main event?
It was Hulk Hogan and Mr. T versus Rowdy Piper and Mr. Wonderful Paul
Orndorff.
Yeah.
I think I watched the first WrestleMania on closed circuit television when that was a thing. I think we went up to like the Poughkeepsie Civic Center and watched it on a screen.
Yeah.
And my father paid whatever astronomical price.
The
price
McMahons put a lot of money into that because if that didn't do good, they were going to lose their house. They were going to lose everything.
And that transformed, that put wrestling over, made it extremely mainstream.
You had Cyndi Lauper there. You had Liberace there. You had Billy Martin, the guest ring announcer.
Billy Martin.
Yeah. You had he went and he had the Rockettes. He had an assembled cast. I mean, guy knows how to market it. You can never take that away from him.
One of the most watched Valley Indie videos we've ever done was Linda McMahon running for Senate one of her times, and she was in Ansonia. And at the end of it, I asked her a couple of questions. It's so hard to interview politicians because, what do you ask them that's different? Then I was just, I got to do this because George the Animal Steel had just been profiled in the Washington Post. Maybe I don't know if he had just passed away. He had somehow made it, or maybe it was a quote about her. Maybe they had interviewed him about her. I think that's what it was. And so I asked her, did you ever think you'd live to see George the Animal Steel quoted in the Washington Post? And she gave me like this animal, because George the Animal Steel was like the complete opposite of his ring persona. He was a really smart guy.
He was a professor.
And a teacher.
Yeah.
So she was really cool, and that got like 1 billion views on a page who generated no money for us, but whatever. All right, so let's get to the stated topic. We had talked about Andre the Giant versus Hulk Hogan, and sort of this. I guess this match is known for the anniversary of which was the end of March 3rd, 2 years ago. It was the official passing of the torch from Andre. And I think this might have been, because I'm uncovering memories here, I loved Andre the Giant. Andre the Giant was everybody's favorite wrestler, and I hated the fact that they made him a bad guy. I think that turned me off to wrestling.
And you know what?
It was like when the 86 Mets, everybody was gone the next year, and then it turns out they were all doing coke. soul crushing to a young boy.
Yeah, and the thing about Andre, when you saw him, he was in great shape and stuff. At this point, he had a lot of health issues that people didn't realize. His back was killing him. He needed a knee replacement, and when the doctor was thinking about doing a knee replacement, they said to Andre, I've never done a knee this big. I don't know if this replacement's going to work because they've never done an operation on somebody with a knee that big. So, the poor guy went through a lot of health issues. The fact that he made it out to the ring that night is a credit to him.
That's one of the things in that documentary. Although I think that some of these documentaries that are coming out now, there's this new trend because documentaries are so hot now on like Netflix and HBO.
Yeah.
But they're a lot of times they're produced by the people who are there. I think WWE had a say in the documentary. But basically, one of the things that comes out of it is that Andre essentially gave his life for the sport.
Oh,
because he had that form of, and I'm going to get the name wrong. It was like a form of, it was gigantism. He had that.
Yeah, the Giant's disease. Yeah.
But he never really got it treated.
No,
because he was always worried that he had to put on a show, and he had to, he was worried that it was an asset for him in some way. So he's sort of a sad story because he died so young.
Yeah, he was 46 years old. Yeah. But, the build-up to him turning bad, this is what I mean now. Like, I can't watch wrestling now because they don't try to build on anything. They try to have, like, a storyline with somebody in a week and try to settle it the next week. And it's just not good TV. But they did such a great job building up to this match. It all started, like, in the spring of '86. Andre was supposed to go out for a tag team match. He didn't show up. The reason he didn't show up is because he got a part in the Princess Bride movie. I don't know if you ever saw that.
Of course, yeah.
So he got a part in there, so to have him off TV, they made it where he was suspended. Now, fast forward a little bit in the summer, this new tag team comes out from Japan. They're called the Machines. You had Little Machine, you had Super Machine, and you had Giant Machine. Well, the Giant Machine, it's Andre under there.
I have no memory of this. Okay.
You could tell. And Bobby the Brain Heenan was so adamant that it was Andre that he kept pushing for the, WWF to take notice and do something about it. So the figurehead president at the time was this guy named Jack Tunney. He told Bobby Heenan, if you could prove it's Andre, he'll be suspended forever. So the whole summer, they built on that. Then you fast forward a little bit. He gets reinstated in November, and there was this big secret meeting, and nobody would talk about the meeting. But Bobby Heenan was at the meeting, and when they would ask, what was said at the meeting, they kept saying, we can't talk about it. Now, fast forward to January, they give Hulk Hogan this big trophy for being champion for 3 years.
Okay.
Andre comes out, and he comes out and Rowdy Piper saying, it's Hulk Hogan's best friend in the whole world, Andre the Giant. And Andre looks at him and goes, 3 years to be a champion, that's a long time. He shakes Hogan's hand, and I kid you not, the way I saw Hogan look at him when he shook his hand, because I guess he shook it pretty hard, I said, don't tell me they're making this guy turn bad. Because I just saw Mr. Wonderful do it to Hulk. I'm like, don't tell me they're going to make Andre bad. Now, right after that happens, Bobby Heenan's doing commentary with Gorilla Monsoon. And he's saying to Gorilla Monsoon, I think it's a travesty that Andre the Giant's been undefeated for 15 years, and they don't give him nothing, but they give Hulk Hogan a trophy for being champion 3 years. Right there, I knew he was turning bad.
And didn't they give Andre a smaller trophy?
But the funny thing is that Bobby Heenan hated the guy. He's trying to get him suspended. Now all of a sudden he's saying he should get a trophy. So you knew when they gave him the smaller trophy, and Hogan came out and said, thank you for doing this for Andre. When Andre just walked away, you knew where they were going.
And then just picking up on that, this is a report from BleacherReport.com, who at some point, I don't know when this was published, went into the history of this match. And they say, shortly thereafter, Hogan was a guest on Piper's Pit, hosted by Roddy Piper. To the shock and awe of every fan watching, Andre the Giant confronted Hogan and revealed that he had aligned himself with Bobby the Brain Heenan. He then challenged Hogan to a match for the WWE Championship at WrestleMania 3, which I remember.
Yeah.
And then they go into the kind of YouTube video officially from the WWE.
If you ever get a chance, though, Eugene.
Wait, let me just ask you, though. were you angry when they turned Andre the heel? Did you have the reaction that I had? 'Cause-
No, I was more angry when Mr. Wonderful turned on Hulk Hogan. Because I loved the way Mr. Wonderful looked. He had that body, and you always kind of dreamed you could look like that.
No
And
steroids there.
Yeah. I was crushed when he turned on Hulk Hogan. When Andre did, I was more worried that Andre was going to beat him. I didn't want Hogan to lose.
Andre was the giant.
Yeah, but I'll tell you, it's a credit to Andre because he came across as this great guy for years and years, waved to the fans all the time. He really did a good job playing the bad guy.
Right, he totally committed to it.
But if you ever get a chance, go on YouTube and watch that interview where he turns on Hogan. That's when you knew that something wasn't right with his health because he's wearing a sports jacket and he's got like a pink collared shirt and you just see sweat all over the shirt. And then as a kid, you don't notice that. But when you watch it later, you really see that he was hurting.
He just doesn't, he looks like he's in pain.
Yeah, it looks like he's in total pain.
And that was, then they had WrestleMania, what was it? What did we say?
WrestleMania 3. And the whole card.
Pontiac Silverdome.
Yeah, and I think it was 93,270 people, something like that. And the card on there was just tremendous. But everybody was building up to that main event. I mean,
what were some of the other matches? I don't remember.
You remember the Macho Man, correct? Randy Savage.
Yeah, sure.
Well,
also going to be in that Vice documentary for the way he treated Elizabeth.
Well, Macho Man, months earlier, had damaged Ricky the Dragon Steamboat's throat with a ring bell. And the angle was Ricky the Dragon Steamboat had a crushed, larynx. He couldn't talk and stuff. So finally, their feud was going to come to an end. The Steamboat was going to get a shot at Randy Savage's Intercontinental belt. And the funny thing about the match was, the big match was supposed to be Hogan and Andre, but this match stole the show. It was one of the best matches you'll ever see. And to this day, I could be wrong, I think it's still regarded as the best match ever in WrestleMania history. And it just and George the Animal was in Ricky's corner. Obviously, Macho Man had Miss Elizabeth, but George ends up really costing the Macho Man the match.
I'm trying to because George was always obsessed with Miss Elizabeth, right?
Yeah,
cannot do that.
And that was a great storyline. That's for another day.
Ridiculous.
But that's for another storyline. Then you had, you talked about King Kong Bundy. I'm sure you remember this. Do you remember WrestleMania 3? He was in a mixed tag team match against Hillbilly Jim, where they both had midgets for partners. And Bundy got annoyed at the midget, and he slammed him and gave him an elbow drop. And Bundy was like, 406? Yeah, and he gave that poor midget, an elbow drop. And I remember one of my friends who was there that night with me, he cried because he felt so bad for that midget.
For the little guy, for the small person.
So, they had that match. You also had the Honky Tonk Man against Jake
Elvis.
the Snake Roberts. If you remember, the Honky Tonk had hit him over the head with a guitar. So they had that angle going on. And Alice Cooper actually was in Jake's corner.
Oh, man.
Because he loved snakes, Alice Cooper. So that was the big story.
Jake the Snake's an interesting story. I remember when in college, that first documentary of note, as my dog chews. Sophie, don't chew on the table.
I think it was Beyond the Mat.
Beyond the Mat, where it was Jake the Snake in the throes of his crack addiction, getting high. And he just, I guess, last I heard he's sober now, but he sort of made a second career of just talking about, being, he's the wrestler. I guess the dude that ended up making that Mickey Rourke movie saw that documentary, and Jake the Snake was a big inspiration for the character Mickey Rourke plays in The Wrestler, which is a movie, I think it's a little overrated. I liked it.
He got nominated, I think, for an Oscar.
He did, yeah. Mickey Rourke's there's a whole other podcast. That guy was supposed to be the next Brando, and he just kind of went
but that resurrected his career.
For a little bit, and then he got a lot of whatever jobs.
Yeah.
But it's funny to hear some of the stories in that Andre the Giant documentary that HBO did about people he didn't like. He wasn't a big fan of Macho Man.
No, he didn't.
Because Macho Man would wear
the Warrior.
He would wear too much body oil.
Yeah,
Hogan tells that great story, and also apparently he didn't like Big John Studd. Because Big John Studd copied Andre's move of going over the top rope when he came into the ring. He'd walk over it to. And the Giant didn't like that.
It's funny you bring up Hogan, though. Hogan, as much as I love him, a lot of his stories are not true. And I'll just tell you one that is definitely not true. Because I remember the whole card, and he just comes across as like a total idiot when he says this. He's talking about how he went to a Make-A-Wish Foundation thing, and this kid asked him, could you send me something when you get to the ring, or can you wave to me and acknowledge me? I'm going to be sitting in the front row. And this was at SummerSlam Wembley Stadium. And then Hogan tells the story that when he came to the ring, he saw the empty chair and he had realized the kid had died because he wasn't there. Hogan wasn't even on the card that night for SummerSlam Wembley Stadium. Yeah. And he's saying he was in the main event. He wasn't even on the card. He was nowhere to be found. And that's just one of like his outlandish stories. There's so many of them that like he says you would just like.
Now has he been? I know he's had.
Oh, like, and then Andre died a week later after the WrestleMania 3 match. I mean, he wrestled him a year later in the main event.
Well, Hogan's an interesting character because there you have. I'd argue. I mean, like, yeah, Hogan was the guy, and I stopped watching, so I don't know if The Rock or what's his name, John Cena, were at the same level of fame. But for my money, Hogan is the most famous wrestler, right? Am I wrong there?
Stone Cold Steve Austin probably made more money in the short term than Hulk Hogan did. But Hulk Hogan made tons of money long term. And at the end of the day, like, those cards filled up, those WrestleManias filled up because they wanted to see Hogan.
Hogan was the biggest ever.
They tried the Ultimate Warrior. They tried to make him... They tried to have Hogan pass the torch, and he let the Warrior beat him. But after like 6 months, they weren't getting the same numbers they got with Hogan. They went back to Hogan again.
And I find fascinating, like Hogan's it's my dog moving around again. One of the things that's fascinating about Hogan, and a lot of these guys, like I love going onto YouTube and you just type in like, I think it's called You Shoot, and it's these guys
shoot interviews.
Yeah, they're so fat, and you don't even have to be like half. Like when I look back, I only watched for a couple of years. From probably 81 to 85 when I was real young.
Yeah.
So I don't even remember a lot of it. But these guys, there is such a fascinating culture, especially of that time period when they work to keep the kayfabe or keep it secret or whatever. They're very interesting characters, just as people, and they have dark sides and whatever. Oh, hi, Sophie. My dog probably has to go to the bathroom, but I mean Hogan. The guy he was set, famous, most famous wrestler of all time. Has a reality show with his family on VH1. Probably makes it. I would assume that's a decent paycheck. And then gets embroiled with like that whole Bubba the Love Sponge sex tape garbage.
Yeah.
Like what? And then he's just essentially ruined for a while after that because he had said the N-word on somebody had recorded him, released that. Is he still connected? I heard they scrubbed all his stuff.
They did, but they finally brought him back. He actually He actually did a lot of speaking, and I believe they brought him back in the summer, like. Not on TV, but they had him in the like dressing room, and he talked to all the guys about how you gotta, make sure
keep your head on straight.
Yeah. But when Mean Gene Okerlund died, they had a tribute show, and they had Hogan come out and pay tribute to Mean Gene. So they have brought him back, but it took about 5 years to do it. It was a mistake he made, and I'm sure he regrets it every day. But, the guy, when it came to wrestling, here's a guy who became a bad guy years later in another federation and still was at the top of his game. He was the number one bad guy, the number one draw. So, as a good guy, he was phenomenal, and then he proved he could be a bad guy, too.
It's interesting to see, just looking back now over the past 40 years, how Ric Flair... He was always the NWA guy. He was always kind of the smaller market guy. He was always, in my opinion, he was less than Hogan because Hogan, with Vince McMahon, they took over the whole world. But Flair sort of hung on. He's kind of like the Nolan Ryan of he's just like he was still out there, and he finally, I think, got like the universal respect. But later, like not in the 80s, I don't think.
Well, you know what? Again, you had said you stopped watching, but in the early 90s. They had a guy running the NWA, and the guy was not a fan of the older guys. He wanted to kind of weed them out. So he was kind of screwing with Ric Flair. So they had an issue over his contract, and he fired Ric Flair. So something that was unheard of back then, Ric Flair sent the NWA belt to the WWF. And on one of their shows one day, Bobby Heenan's holding the belt saying, I have a guy who's under contract with another wrestling federation, but he may be coming here soon. And comparing this guy to Hulk Hogan is like comparing ice cream to horse manure. And it was just so well done. But he did come to the WWF.
And
won the belt.
wrestled for forever. I mean, the fact he's still kind of around or not?
He's around more as like an ambassador kind of thing. Like he'll show up at the big events. He'll do his woo, all that stuff. He just turned 70, and they had a 70th birthday party for him.
He's been appreciated, I guess.
The biggest problem with him, and he'll tell you it too, is he just liked to party his whole life.
Yeah, there's legendary story. Like Grantland had a story where it was like hanging out with Ric Flair for a week, and it was just like...
I think he tells the story. I brought up that SummerSlam at Wembley Stadium. Well, he wasn't even on the card that night. He was just going to interfere in a match. Well, they went to some place out there, some bar, and he had like a $30,000 tab. Vince McMahon had to help him pay it.
So there were reports that he was living in a hotel because he owed taxes and he couldn't show himself in certain places. I don't know if any of that's true. I just remember reading it.
And he's been married a bunch of times. He just got married for the 5th time. So, that's the type of life a wrestler has.
Yeah.
Especially when you're famous. And down south, in that territory, he was the most famous
He was the guy.
Yeah.
And before, we should wrap this up, and I'm sorry to skip around so much.
That's okay.
But I just wanted to say, Roddy Piper... It's so sad that he is no longer with us. He passed away. I saw him at a Monster Mania, again, this horror convention thing. They had a reunion of the guys from that movie, They Live. Roddy Piper starred in They Live,
and that was a pretty successful film.
It wasn't like successful when it came out, but it's
got a cult following.
It's built up, and now it's beloved. I mean, the same. It's directed by John Carpenter. Right. Same thing with The Thing. He made The Thing, and critics hated it. It was a bomb when it came out right after Alien, but now it's regarded as not only one of the greatest horror movies of all time, but one of the greatest movies of all time. But anyway, it was David Keith. I always get Keith David and David Keith confused.
No, I think it was David Keith. Yeah.
So he's up there. The lead actress is up there with John Carpenter and Roddy Piper. Roddy Piper he could tell a story. And he had a podcast for a while, too. Yeah. That guy could tell a story unlike anyone I've ever heard. Hilarious. He had, he's in this ballroom. The place, he stole it. John Carpenter's a living legend. The guy made Halloween. Yeah. He's well-respected. Assault on Precinct 13. Piper just owned the crowd. And it's so much respect for him, the way he could just command an audience like that. His personality, his charisma. Yeah. And he was telling, who knows if these stories were true. And I thought maybe he was under the influence of something, because it just seemed like he was just...
Well,
he was all over the place, but he was awesome.
The thing about Piper is he never wanted them to ever say wrestling was fake. And if anybody ever did, he'd slap you in the face, to show you that it wasn't fake. He tried to protect the business as much as he could because... And one of the things you don't realize about him, if you ever read his book, he refused to put his shoulders on the mat for anybody.
Oh, no kidding.
Really? He said, he goes, I'm as good as anybody when it comes to being a fighter, and you're not putting my shoulders on the mat unless you could prove you could do it. I'm not letting you do it.
Oh, that's awesome.
He did for Bret Hart because he felt like Bret Hart was a great guy. He did it for him, but he never would do it for Hogan until years and years later. Not when they had their big thing, the Rock and Wrestling connection.
He
never would.
No kidding.
And he drove Vince McMahon nuts. You could hear the stories. So Piper was that type of guy, though. He really believed, in the wrestling.
Yeah, he was great to see live, and it's too bad he's not going to get a chance to do it again. All right, Mike, should we call it a day?
Yeah, I think we've discussed enough.
Hopefully this works. Who do you got coming up on Hometown Heroes on Channel 10?
Well, I have
Comcast.
part 2. It was supposed to air tonight. It'll probably air later this week. We had a little issue. I'll have Greg Spock and Ken Chidoba. They were on the 1982 Derby basketball team. And, that was the last Derby team that had made the tournament until about 22 years later. So we kind of pay tribute to that 82 team. But next month, we're going to have Joe Bonanto, legendary high school coach. Joe Bonanto, actually, you talked about the Mets before. He's the big reason Ron Darling became a successful pitcher. Ron Darling was an infielder, and Joe Bonanto took him aside and said, Ron, because he coached him at Yale. He said, Ron.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, he coached Ron Darling at Yale. He said, Ron, if you want to be able to be a big league player someday, you need to be a pitcher. You're not an infielder. And Ron always tells the story whenever people ask him how he became a pitcher. He always mentions Joe Bonanto's name.
No kidding.
So legendary coach, and it was a lot of fun talking to him. And part 1 will be next month.
In May.
Yeah, with Joe Bonanto.
Awesome. So that's Channel 10 Comcast.
Yeah,
Check it out.
And then it goes right to YouTube right after that.
Sweet. All right, Mike. Thanks.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Eugene.